Okay, so one of the good things about throwing your own party is that you can take over, and actually I'm second in the lineup. So while these amazing women are changing the slides, I'm going to try to set you in the mood. So I became HIV positive, as I think I said before, in 1985 upon arrival in Canada, and then in 1989 I entered the field. The interesting thing about that, for me today in the context of this, is that we did not have old people then, and we were not preparing ourselves to be old. It was a disease of the young and very romantic, and in some ways romanticized a little bit too much. So being here with you and discussing these things is kind of a very odd thing. So that's one thing I wanted to tell you as a story. The second, I wanted to tell you about, a young man, 40 years old, who, this year, living with HIV for about 20 years, who, and this is so you understand the impact that this has on the lives of people and the impact on the everyday, who's now being diagnosed with a rare combination of cancers, lymphomas that are detected in people living with HIV. And so his life is being turned around completely, and he's going to be needing people like you to help him go back to the workplace and all those things that they're saying that people living with HIV at 40 maybe should not have. So that young man is my husband that was at home and going through, about 6 months of chemo. So I'm very, it's touching a very important part of my being, not only my professional being, but my personal being. And I know this is what's happening to you as well. So narrow all of that down to a particular field, which is neurocognitive disorders. I am not an expert on neurocognitive disorders. I'm a qualitative researcher. I tell stories. So I was interested in here when I heard that most or about 50% of people living with HIV will develop some sort of asymptomatic to very symptomatic forms of HIV-associated neurocognitive disorders. And so I thought, well, just one more thing this comes to, add to the plate. And I know I need to look at you for the 10 minutes. And then I was interested to hear the stories that I'm always interested in here is what happens once you leave the medical office or your case manager. What happens, right? So people are very nice and they help you. We've heard a lot about the systems, but then you go home. And going home is sometimes going into a vortex or a lonely place, or for some of us a joyous place, no matter what's going on. So in this particular context, we, as a good opportunistic host of an opportunistic virus, I surround myself by really amazing people. So, and some of you are here, and we gathered this amazing team to put together a number of interviews of what people are saying about neurocognitive disorder and how they're living it. And that's the gist of the study called Heads Up. You can tweet us there. And, oh, thank you, Kelly. So what we did, the process, I'll go through it fairly quickly so we get to the tips, which I think is something that might resonate with some of you who work on the day-to-day with people with HIV. So this amazing group of researchers and clinicians and people with HIV went to Toronto and Vancouver and looked for folks who were diagnosed with hand in 3 healthcare facilities. So 2 of those in Toronto. One is Casey House, and I know Sue and other folks are here. Where are you, Sue? Sorry. Everything becomes blur. And Rosaline and Patrick are here from the Dr. Peters Center, and the third one is the Neurocognitive Clinic at St. Michael's Hospital, where my boss, Dr. Sean Rourke, who's the executive director of the OHTN, works. So they screened, that was all done in privacy and confidentiality, about 20 people, and most of them were moved on to the interview part. This is in itself a methodological interest because we already had people who were being diagnosed at that moment, so we had to kind of figure out what that meant at the same time. And they were given feedback by neuropsychologists in Vancouver and in Toronto. And then Alex Terpstra and I proceeded to interview, you did most of the interviews, I did a number of them at one of the locales. So the methods we used, the community-based research, that for me, of course, is very important. A quick aside on that, as a person with HIV who promotes the greater involvement of persons living with HIV, or GPA, if you don't know, Google it, you should know it if you're here, and you should use it in the future. There's no question about that. Oh, you went really fast through that one. Very important within that context and those principles is that we work with 8 peer research associates. In this case, most of the time peer research associates are brought in to gather the data. We consider people living with HIV of any ilk who've traveled any kind of road as intellectuals, so we wanted them to help us with the analysis and interpretation. So they were an essential part, and they still are on that. I'm trying to energize this team, you didn't know this, for a second heads-up catalyst. News for you, I'm coming back. Okay, so, and this is what people with HIV told us. So we've summarized this in the form of tips. For us, and for me, it's very important, and this is not to diminish the power of science and the power of theory, but at the end of the day, I said, what do I take home? What can I tell people, right, to start a conversation? So this is not clinical advice. This is what people told us in the context of those interviews. That needs to be clear. So, first of all, everybody told us it's very hard to start a conversation. We know that people living with HIV do not necessarily tell the doctors all the truth. You know that, right? You know that. Sometimes they don't tell them what they do in bedroom, if they go to a bedroom. Or, they don't necessarily tell them, I keep on forgetting your appointments. That's why I never show up. Because it's kind of embarrassing for a number of reasons. So that was a very important tip we got from them. Now, getting screened, which was part of this kind of intervention, we really didn't go into it trying to do this, but it became an intervention, and it makes a difference. Some of it is positive, some of it is negative. The moment you give people another acronym or another illness, it adds to the burden of, Richard, you said something, the burden of illness, I think, right? So you got to be careful of what, this is not easy news. So on top of all the other stuff, I have this other thing, right? But sometimes it can make a difference because people can understand things like memory. I know we're talking here about time in very chronological order, but we are part of a group of people who've lived through a massive sociocultural epidemic, and people are carrying that with them as well, right? That's part of the stigma, it's part of the tradition, it's part of the history. And so some people feel like relieved that they're not going to lose their memories, right? It's very important for them. Now, some things that you guys in OT and other, helping professions know very well is they said, hey, what I can do is I can be methodical and habitual. I can do the same things all the time, and I can do them more or less in the same order. That helps me a great deal. And along with that, an aside that I always like very much is folks with pets seem to do very well because the pets need to eat and poop. And so they need to take them out at certain times, and really that helps them. So you've heard this in other, areas in supporting people living with different conditions, but it's very important here as well. There are helpful strategies and tactics, and all kinds of technology, from pen and paper and putting calendars, in your front door like I do. I have to remind myself who I am in the morning before leaving, or, doing something with your new technology. So all technologies, from the old ones to the new ones, are helping people. And the tactics are things like laughing it off. We heard a lot of jokes, and I know humor has this very kind of prickly place in HIV and serious illness, but I tell you, in the confidence of working or living with other people living with HIV, we do laugh a little bit about it, because you know what? If you don't, it gets really heavy. So they told us that that is important, and it has its limitations. You need to see where it stands, right? There are strategies and tactics that I will not delve into, which are not necessarily what we consider optimal, like using particular drugs, including really heavy drugs, in order to kind of focus your attention. And they told us about that as well, so it's important to keep in mind. Take charge of your health. We always say this to interprofessional students, you know, you have to become an advocate. How am I doing? 5 minutes, I can go into another story. You always have to, you know, have a conversation. This all seems very simplistic. It's very difficult for a person of any age to start a conversation one-on-one with Dr. So-and-so, with Dr. So-and-so. We still have a lot of kind of disparity. Some of it is real, some of it is internalized stigma that is in our heads. So do not underestimate this empowerment and advocacy from the patient. Oh. And that says exactly the same. Wonderful. Okay, so I think, and again, practice healthy living within your means. Of course, this one of those things you think, really, you did 25 interviews to discover that, but it's very important that people are telling us they do want to do well, even when they're using crystal meth, even when they're having what we call risky or unprotected anal sex. They still want to do well. Those people are do not have a death wish, and they want to do well with their memories. They want to keep their loved ones. They want to keep their friends. They want to keep, you know, what they treasure in their brain. So one thing does not cancel the other. And they told us to try practical solutions and to try again. Many of these things, like putting posters in your fridge or in other places, kind of fade a little bit with time, or they become boring and they try something else. Some of them simply do not work. Some of the things we say to our patients with great or our colleagues or friends with great love do not work for them. They're very individualized, some of them. So people need to know that they will fail. And I think they were telling us very clearly that they failed in certain things and they've tried something else. Alex is corroborating this. Thank you. He's done a great deal, you know, the distilling of this with me, so I appreciate that. And to try and find a support network. This is interesting. I know Charlie will be talking later about support network, and it's not all about, you know, going out and trying to be part of the world all the time, but sometimes it's about, I'm not going to steal your thunder, it's about not doing that, and you'll tell us why. So we tend to say to people, don't isolate yourselves, don't be at home alone, don't be a shut in, but you know, it depends on the style of each person, and as a frontline worker, as a clinician, is something that you need to kind of assess, and they were telling us that. This comes really more directly from Dr. Sean Work, who's a neuropsychologist, and is in his experience as a clinician of people breathed, is that good English? You'll hear it. A sigh of relief, right? When they were told, no, you do not have Alzheimer's, you do not have dementia, you have this other thing that sounds a bit more tenuous, but it's very important for people to understand the distinction. And of course that means that we need to become better at explaining the distinction. So from the point of view, this is what folks living with HIV told us they would like to hear or they need from their healthcare and social care providers. So to get informed about HAND, right? There's still a degree of, ignorance, and by that I don't mean anything bad, but people have not really had the chance to read or do capacity building in that area, but also a little bit of reticence, right? Like, what is this new thing you're trying to, you know, come up with, this new HAND thing? And trust me, I'm not at a place in which I want to build a career on a new strange kind of product. So we got to kind of grapple with that little bit of, what is the word, reticence? Is that an okay word? The other one is, of course, related to what I said earlier, is people want to understand very nuanced and very specific distinctions from their healthcare providers, starting the conversation. This is difficult because you as healthcare providers are not like one single type of people. I mean, we have our own morality, we have our own ways of judging the world, and it's difficult sometimes to start a conversation about what kind of drugs you're using on Saturdays or on Mondays, and or whatever day it is today, Thursday, yes. Or, you know, what kind of memory problems you're having. You know, are you leaving your cat in the closet? Yes, I have. My cat is Orion. He stayed in the closet for full days because I've closed the door. It's true. It's not a lie. Well, I forget. But he's quite happy in there because there's a heater. Okay, we'll move on then. You need to start the conversation and link patients to community programs. 30 years into the epidemic, we still have healthcare providers and people who do not know the organizations in the neighborhood or in the city where they live. Not acceptable. There's some things that in my mind as a patient are simply not acceptable. You know, go to a couple of them, see who's working in there, and tell your patients maybe those people can help you, right? So there's that, and it's important. Build partnership with patients, again, easy to say, difficult to do. What is, what is the extent of that partnership, and how will I help you with your cognitive problems, either memory, word processing, or, and I forget the rest. What is the other one? Memory, word processing? It's a test. Attention, thank you. So, and I think we have the last one. And make your practice hand-friendly. For a long time, there's been all this movement to optimize medical practice, optimize the front line, so you don't offend people, by talking about only specific sex or only specific gender. By the same token, make things in large print. Make things, so people remember where they were or where they have to come back. Help with very practical, everyday tools your patients or your colleagues or your friends. And here you stop there for a second, and you can go there, or you can ask me later. I'm free for consultations and coffees. And the next one, please. Here you have all the wonderful people who participate in this, and my thanks to all of them and to all the people in with HIV. And I hope we're making a difference by exploring this topic, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you.